Rodney, man, it's good to have you. I appreciate you coming. It's been like a year and a half in this bin making, but you're actually the first guest we have. So Rodney Mogen, that's good to have you here.
Well, I'm honored, Brandon. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, there's so much I want to talk to you. And just in our last hour that we've sat here out of the conference room and just hanging out, I learned so much more about you than I ever thought. And it's like there's so much I want to cover here. So first of all, who you are, right? So you have 2 PhDs, one in
business administration and one in financial planning.
Yeah, I knew the financial planning with the business administration, and you're almost about to get your 3rd PhD
in economics.
That is crazy. Do you like to read? I mean,
well,
that is nuts.
It's actually a funny story. I am dyslexic, and
so am I.
And I'm sure we'll talk about this. I'm also autistic and things like that. So school is not my favorite thing to do, but over time, the second I graduated college, I wanted nothing to do with school, nothing to do with designations. But as I did other different things and got promoted or opened up my business and got into different business avenues, people were passing me over because I didn't have a certain degree behind my name or things like that.
Sure.
And I didn't understand. I didn't agree with it, especially since I was, lapping a lot of the people, without the degree. So I got the degree just so people would actually listen to me.
That's it. And not only do you have those degrees, but you also have 41 designations. And I'm talking like CHFC, CLU. I mean, these are some of the biggest designations, CFP.
I don't have a CFP because I went the doctorate route.
Yeah, that's right.
But I do have...
I'm a doctorate in financial planning. Why do I need a certified financial planner?
But I do have a CFA, so I am a certified financial analyst.
Yeah, that's the hardest degree, I think.
Correct.
It's like nobody understands this. So I always explain it because we have a CFA on our staff, Marco, right? And so I always explain a CFA is like taking the law test on 3 different subjects, 3 different years in a row, and if you fail one of those, you're starting all over again, pretty much for that year. I mean, it is. You have to be wicked smart to and just really dedicated. I think a lot of it's the dedication just to spend that much time learning about the markets.
There it is, and it's also just about understanding the derivatives, the different things, the variables and stuff like that, and understanding how it works with the test world, and then also just in real world. And where I actually failed the first test twice. And I don't like to think I'm the smartest person, but I persevere on it. And the problem was I kept confusing real world with test world.
Yeah, right.
And, so I think that's the biggest thing is, I now understand academic world, test world, and real world. And what I like to always say is I kind of merge all 3 together and can explain it to everyone. And I like to say that I like to make the complex simple.
Sure. I think they're really been around a lot of guys, but I found out that the most gifted guys in our industry or the most successful guys also do that same thing. Is if you can make the complex simple, and you could talk on the levels of the person you're talking to is really where that, because sometimes you're talking to somebody that's very sophisticated and understands it, and they want to have a deeper conversation about the analytics of derivatives or whatever you're having the conversation about. But I think that's the intelligence is that, in my mind. It's like if you can read people and also understand where they're sharing information, that disconnect of that is always the most interesting part to me. I like it. I like the teaching side of it. Yeah. I think financial planning at its core is just you're a teacher, you're an educator.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that I love kind of working with clients and doing on. But not only this, so we're going to get to a whole lot of stuff, but I got to bring this up because I just found out about this. You are literally the largest or one of the largest landowners in the United States. You own 1.5 million acres of farmland.
Yes.
That is crazy. And a lot of this inherited through families going back to the 1900s?
Actually, 1800s, 1880s.
1880s, and that's nuts. I don't want to tell anybody where it's at because right, and so it's all held right in trust and all that other stuff. But my point is, 1.5 million acres is. I mean, I thought it when I heard that, and I don't even know if this fact. Ryan looked this fact up for me, but isn't it Bill Gates now Didn't he have like 280,000 acres?
He does.
Right? Isn't it something like 288,000 something? I mean, like he's a chump compared to you, which I'm not a huge fan of Bill Gates, but
242,000 acres.
242,000. So you're what? 4 times, 5 times? Something like that? And so how do you manage that?
So, and I know we're going to probably talk about this too, but like I keep saying, I'm autistic. So a lot of what I do is very structured.
Right.
And I have a very structured day. If I were to show you my calendar, knowing you probably would have a heart attack because of how full it is, but also just the different block times, things like that. So when I found out about the land, it's something I didn't even know. It came in a generation skipping trust to avoid my parents and my aunts and uncles, and it went to me when my grandfather died. And I remember holding his hand, and he's like, "I've got a good surprise for you. I've taught you well. You'll do fine." Had no clue what he was talking about. And then all of a sudden, about 6 months after his death, I get notified that I'm part of this trust, and I didn't do anything with it for a good 10 years because I was 21 when he died. So not until I was 31, and then for the last 15 years, I created a business plan because that's what I do, and I have a structure. And then there were some people on the land that were renting it. Instead of letting them rent the land, I said, I'm going to pay you a salary, and you're going to work the land. I'm going to give you a profit sharing, but you're not going to own it.
Right.
And so I immediately switched their economic situations, and then I hired two general managers that have farming degrees one was actually from A&M and another one from the University of Minnesota. And they actually all of them live on the land all the time. And then those two general managers go around and they make sure that we're checking different things. And, just like you have a CFA on your team, I have a soil scientist. I have a meteorologist. I have a lot of different people on my team so that we can actually figure out when to plant, what to plant, when to yield, all those different things, and really have some really detailed stuff. So I'm in a meeting every morning from 9 to 10 Central Time where that is what we talk about.
So what's the main crops in where you're at? I mean, because we're in Lubbock, so if you don't know, Lubbock, Texas, right? So it's cotton, sorghum, a little bit of grains, right? But it's mainly cotton. Everybody knows we're one of the biggest 13 counties around Lubbock, generates a large, massive amount of the cotton in the world. But there, I wouldn't think it's...
No, it's wheat, hay, corn, radishes, sweet potatoes, and beets.
Really?
Yeah, and lettuce.
So you are getting into some of the perishables, like the consumables. And is this food corn or is this?
So we do both.
You do both.
We do. And soybeans are also a big thing, but soybeans take a lot out of the soil. Yeah. So I've chosen not to do soybeans, but we do food corn and we do grain, or what they call feed corn or grain corn.
Yeah.
So we have our own silos, we have our own processing plants. So I've actually really, like I said, I took that business plan and I really developed exactly what we're going to do. One thing I'm proud of, and I know some people in Texas might get mad at me for this, but we are 100% sustainable. So we are on our own water grid. We are on our own power grid. We have wind turbines, solar. We have, not every tractor and not every farm equipment is electric because they just don't make them. But,
yeah, right.
But so
you're as close as you can get to.
We are as close as we can get to. We also have some hydroponics so that we can grow radishes and other stuff that we can't normally grow on the soil. We have it in warehouses that are kind of greenhouses. They're 6 stories high, and it's all hydroponic. Very little soil or fertilizer is needed, which really I think is where we're going to be going, because especially with what's going on with the fertilizer market, I know a lot of farmers, a lot of ranchers are hurting.
So explain that. What's going on in the fertilizer market?
So it started back in February of last year when Russia invaded Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Over 96% of all the raw materials and also the finished product for fertilizer comes from Russia and Ukraine.
I did not know that.
And so when Russia invaded Ukraine and shut down the ports, fertilizer went up almost 1,000 to 1,500%, depending on where. Now, a lot of farmers were lucky last year because they had already
Yeah, they already planted and they're already past the fertilizing stages.
Well, they hadn't planted, but they had already bought the fertilizer contracts. Okay. But now, this year, fertilizer markets are up. We don't have the same plants that they do over there. We don't have the same raw materials to actually make the fertilizer. So fertilizer itself has gone up about 800% from February of last year. And so some farmers, depending on the size, may have had a contract for about $1.5 to $2 million. I know that sounds a lot, but $1.5 to $2 million for fertilizer to fertilize their farms. Now that same $1.5 to $2 million is probably about $5 to $6 million.
That's crazy.
So if you think about how that's going to affect food supply,
oh yeah,
it's going to be crazy.
And this is a great point to make right here. This is where I think the crop inputs right now to produce any crop today is just astronomical. I was talking to a good friend of mine, Jeff Miller. We were talking about, I don't know how the next generation is going to grow food. It is something that is I'm just a planter with, here in West Texas that I deal with, a couple of dozen farmers, right? Now we're in West Texas. So,
it's more of a way of life.
It's a way of life, but they're pretty good sized farms here, right? It's not like you're in the Iowa states and it's 300-400 acres. It's 5, 10, 20, 30,000 acres is what some of these farmers are running. Everybody thinks that's crazy if you're hearing that from a national, but it's really not, right? It's very flat land out here, and they've been doing it for 100 years, right?
Correct.
And so it's nothing abnormal here, but when you get further north, and that's when you told me kind of where you were at, I was like, that's insane. So of that acreage, I got to ask this, how much is continuous?
I'd say about 65% of it.
Really?
Yeah.
That is crazy. You got minerals on that too?
I do.
That is nuts all the way around. We're going to have this. You're going to have to come back for another podcast because a good buddy of ours is also on the mineral side that's coming on, and he's talking specifically on the different types because nobody understands how minerals work.
Right.
It is absolutely, he has to tell me 3 different ways on what net mineral acre is compared to a royalty acre compared to, it gets crazy.
It's very confusing.
It is very confusing on there, but a great deal. Come back from that. So you're doing all of it, right? So you got the royalties, right? You got the surface, and so now you're doing solar. There's nothing you're not doing on this thing. So how many people are employed on that?
433 right now.
That is crazy. So you got 433 people.
Yeah, and we're looking at, do we add more? Do we contract a little bit, get a little bit more responsibility? Because again, like I was just talking about, the commodity prices,
the crop inputs are too expensive. How are you going to make a profit at all?
Correct. So because we actually were so sustainable last year, diesel wasn't as much of an issue. Now you still have to power tractors.
Yeah.
Some of the tractors are hybrid. We've got them, but they still use diesel. Now we actually do our own shipping. Last year we bought 10 electric semis to do our own shipping, mostly for, we sell acidophilus milk. So basically it's the raw milk. You just put it in a bottle and send it, but you can only send it for 4 to 6 hours. So our trucks are all electric. If they were diesel, we would not have made a profit on that. So I'm with you about your friend of how are the next generation going to farm, because it's become a really big business. And luckily I've been able to counter the big agricultural businesses, but there's also other situations like with Monsanto where they really put out all that GDM food out there and seed, and GMO food and seed, and they then try to sue a lot of farms saying that
the technology, right? The technology patents are inside of it. And there's 2 sides to that, and I don't want to go.
No, I know. But
right. So let's explain what that is, right? So the 2 sides. One side of that is, well, you wouldn't have yields near what the yields are today. I look back when I was in high school. Farmers on
correct,
right, they were happy if they were getting 1.5 bales. Now you're getting 3.5 bales, right, for cotton. So that, and you expect that in today's. So the patents and technology that's went into the seed, right, way less water now usage, which is huge here in West Texas, that I understand. I have no business, explaining this, but right. So I get to see the surface level, right, as talking to these ag producers. But then there's the flip side to that, You got a round baler now that costs what, $780,000. So I mean, I got 3 right now that I'm talking with, and they're in their 20s and 30s, and they're literally going, "Hey, Brandon, like, how am I eventually ever going to learn own land?" And I'm going, "Well, I mean, by the time you make your equipment payment, you make your input cost payments, right? And you're living, that's really, really hard." So all these old ag guys that are passing stuff off, the next generation doesn't want to farm. That's a big thing, right? So there's a lot of complexity going into it, but there's 2 sides of that coin.
Exactly.
Saying, how's that going to work going forward? I don't have an answer. I'd love to, well, I mean, managing the size of a farm you have, how did you, I mean, granted, you're incredibly gifted, and we'll talk about, I mean, you're gifted in 2 different ways too, but it's also kind of, autistic is right, but that also gives you laser focus, I would think, to be able to do some of the things you're doing. It's crazy. But how are you being able to even estimate what your operations are going to do to make sure you're not taking risk? Are you marketing your crops too? Are you hedging them?
Yes. So that is one of the things that my grandfather taught me. And like being autistic, one of the things is I was limited verbal. Really, I really said very little words until I was about 16. And the only person I really ever talked to was my grandfather. And so from the time I was 6, every summer I would go and I'd spend 2 months on his farm in his state. And basically, he would teach me everything. And one of the things he taught me every morning, and I still do this to this day, is I grab the Wall Street Journal Monday through Friday. I pull up the commodity section. I look at those pricings, and that's how I actually plan what we're gonna plant. I look at the market. I know what I can already kind of. He showed me that I can kind of see what the trends are, what the different things are. A lot of farmers, and this is controversial, but a lot of farmers will look at the farm bill that gets passed in late December every single year, and they'll make their planting decisions based on the subsidies.
I would agree with that.
I have not taken a federal subsidy on the farms at all. I don't do that. So I do take a lot more risk. But by watching the markets and knowing the markets, and it's something I do every morning at 5 a.m. I study them every single morning, and then I read the Wall Street Journal as well, like I said. And we make decisions. And there's a lot that goes into it too.
So what's that decision process? So give me an example there.
Yeah. So I'll give you a great example with wheat.
Okay.
All right. So wheat it's not necessarily takes a lot of nutrients out of the soil, but it needs a lot of nutrients in the soil to grow. And you got to figure out when you're going to plant it, and then it's got a long planting cycle or growing cycle. But back in February last year, again, when the Russia-Ukraine situation happened, because of fertilizer, because they also have a lot of wheat that comes out of that area, wheat contracts spiked. I won't say what the price was, but they went up almost 700%. I locked into a contract.
Oh my goodness.
At 700% the normal rate at that time. Now, when you lock into that contract, you actually have to put a down payment down. You have to buy the option, basically.
Right. And you're also committed to producing it.
That's what I was going to say. You're committed to producing it, and you got to produce it by a certain date.
Right.
So you've got to count on weather. You got to count on a lot.
Yeah, you can't hedge 100%. Like, you're crazy if you do, right? But even 60 to 70% is even extreme from what I've seen.
Correct. So I lucked out, got that contract. We lucked out with weather conditions for the most part, and we were able to deliver the contract. That was able to pay for everything else once we did that. But this year, and with wheat, after I locked in that contract, a month later, it dropped below what it was trading
before that spike.
Before the spike.
Yeah.
So if you're not paying attention, now you're locked into a much lower market rate. Now, I will tell you, the people I locked into the contract tried to renegotiate with me multiple times. No, I wasn't going to do that.
No.
So, but, and they kept raising my call price and my call time. Luckily, I had it all planned. But those are all the different things you have to figure out. And you have to figure out, can we plant? There is snow on the ground where we have the farms, and if you get a late snow, that's going to screw up your planting. So yeah, there's a lot of risks you have to kind of think about. So we do hedge it, but you can't hedge 100%.
No, you can't. what's water like where you're at? Is it like West Texas? Like water is the biggest commodity we have. Like, do y'all have water? Like,
Yeah, there's water, but
what's your average rain? Like here in West Texas, I think it's like 18 inches is what all we're getting. Are you getting that 25, 30, 40?
No, it's about, it's probably about 30, 35 inches of rain, but they do get snow. Now this year they're getting a lot of snow, but the last 3 years they didn't get a lot of snow.
Sure.
And what you want is you actually want about anywhere from about 3 to 6 feet of snow, because believe it or not, and this is something I learned a couple years ago, is snow when it melts actually has some nitrogen.
I was fixing to say it's all the nitrogen that goes into the soil right there.
It goes into the soil.
Yeah.
But you don't want too much. If you've got 8 feet, 10 feet, you're over you get way too much nitrogen. So the ideal thing is about 3 to 6 feet of snow. And especially if you have some warm days throughout the winter where it will melt it a little bit, but not too much. So right now we're right at that 6 foot level right now. So
that's cool. That's good. So you're ideal there, and you get the nitrogen from there, but you're not as irrigated. Y'all don't have to worry about pivots and doing row crop. Is it row crop farming, or are y'all more modern now where it's all flat and?
It's still some of it's row cut, some of it's modern. I'm trying to get to more modern because it actually uses less irrigation.
Yeah, it does. It totally does, right? And so, drip,
yes.
A lot of drip. Yeah, so y'all are, okay. And that's used to be such an anomaly. Now it's kind of the standard going here.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're actually collecting the snow and we're putting it into water tanks. Like I said, we're trying to be...
How are you doing that? Are you plowing snow up and then
Not on the open fields, but on all our dead areas, we actually do collect it. And what I do is, if you've ever lived in snowy areas, when you have a lot of snow, the plow companies have to
push it somewhere,
and they have to haul it off somewhere. So I actually buy that snow and I have them put it into the tanks.
Huh. You've thought of everything.
I don't know about everything, but I try to think of things because.
Did you say this is the first year you were profitable with it?
This was the first. No, this year coming in 2023, we're expecting to actually show our first profit because we were doing so much reinvestment.
Oh, okay. So a lot of R&D and
a lot of R&D. I mean, we were profitable. It was just we were just constantly putting it back
in, and growing the operations.
Correct.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so you brought this up a couple of times to get off that. I just think that's so interesting, right? Especially because the little West Texas boy out here that gets to see these farmers, and then you tell that story, and it's like jaw dropping. I just think it's amazing. But you brought this up a couple of times, right? Yeah. So you're autistic, like. I did not know. I mean, we've worked together for over a year now. I mean, we've known each other for almost 10, right? And so we've worked together for pretty consistently for a little over a year now. So I didn't know you're autistic. And so I have 1,000 questions to this, right? And I'm going to try to frame them where hopefully none of them's offensive, right?
You can't offend me.
Okay, good, because I'm not trying is what I'm saying. But I got to understand the scale.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing that is a gap in my mind, just being ignorant. Okay. And what does that mean? Because you've heard Asperger's, right? Mm-hmm. And then autistic. Isn't that a version of it? It's just a milder version, or I don't want to say mild. It's not the right word. No. It's just a different.
So, actually, in the community, Asperger's is no longer recognized.
Really?
It was actually something that was done to label some autistic people, to call them somewhat normal. Oh, they're Asperger's.
Yeah.
And so they're not truly autistic, but they're not truly normal or.
See, I already stuck my foot in my mouth on the first question.
No, you didn't, because no one really knows this.
And I never would have known that. Yeah.
And so, but basically, what they now refer to it as autistic spectrum disorder, ASD. Okay. And trust me, I call myself Aspergery all the time, or Asperger's, basically all the time. But some people will actually take offense to that, and you do have a pretty wide spectrum. You've got people that, and the funny thing is, and I call it funny, is when I say I'm autistic, people go, "No, you're not," and I'm like, "Actually, I am." But what you see now and what you've dealt with me is 20 years of therapy.
Sure.
of trying to figure things out. But you put me in certain settings, put me at a barn dance or put me, if I went to your house and you had 50 friends, I would not be the same person that you're used to being with.
Right.
Because I would be off in the corner, I'd have a drink in my hand, and I would not talk. Social settings scare the you-know-what out of me. But when you and I have known each other on a business relationship, and it's stuff that I know really, really well. So I actually have to write out a script pretty much on everything I do every single day. I do a little thing that, hopefully I can say this, I do a little thing on LinkedIn called Tuesday Tactics, and I do a video.
I've watched them.
And I have one that's posting right now that says about adaptability. And I actually talk about mental adaptability. And for me, I have to actually adapt a lot. But when I adapt, I have to take a break. Literally close the door for a second and rewrite a new script of how I'm going to deal with that. So if someone's talking to me negatively or something comes up in my life, you call and yell at me about something.
Oh, I've blown you up once or twice,
exactly.
man. I don't mean to.
No. It's who you are, and that's okay. But if you notice, I sometimes just say, hey, let me give you a call right back or whatever. I have to literally just reframe my mind to figure out exactly what it is, write the script, and then I can call back or I can deal with it. I can't do it as quickly as some other people can. I was limited verbal until I was about 16. Not because I couldn't talk, but really what I've learned through therapy is it's because I didn't really want to interact with a lot of people I was interacting. One of my best stories that I share, and I think this will give you an idea to your question, is my mom's a teacher. She's now retired, but she was a teacher, and I was at this really prestigious private school in Los Angeles because I got to go for free because of my mom. And they made you take these really stupid standardized tests every year from the time you were in first grade until I think I was 8th grade or whatever.
I think they still do that today.
And it was these things called ERBs. And when I started taking them, I looked at the questions. I'm like, these are stupid. And I started drawing pictures on the Scantron. So people today probably don't know what a Scantron is, but it's actually a sheet of bubbles that you actually just fill out. But the top score was a 10. I consistently got 1s and 2s. Now, for a prestigious school, they don't want a bunch of 1s and 2s. They want 9s and 10s.
Yeah, they want to make sure everybody graduates top of their class and everything like that. So, and keeps it prestigious.
So I get called into my mom's boss, the assistant principal. My dad's there, my mom's there, and he's saying, okay, this is the 3rd year in a row he's gotten 1s and 2s. He's obviously not understanding the material. He's just not this school's, type of person. We also know he has social issues. He doesn't talk to people. Probably he should go into an institution. That might be his best path. And I remember my mom and my dad just have an argument in front of her boss, and she's crying because she's a teacher and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, what's best for her son. And
right.
Yeah.
And I said, excuse me. Now, keep in mind, other than my parents, no one has heard me talk. And including my teacher and the assistant principal who's there. And they're like, what? And they're like, Rodney? I'm like, mm-hmm. What do you want to say? I'm like, what are my grades? Well, you have straight A's. So let me get this straight. You're saying that the test determines my intelligence, right? I'm like, well, yeah, it determines how well you're going to do in this world. Okay, so, and you're saying that because this is such a stringent school. Now, keep in mind, I'm 8 at the time, and I'm saying things that are, adult level conversations.
But, yeah, you're having an adult conversation at 8.
And he's shocked that I'm even talking. And he's like, yeah, we have standards. And I'm like, okay, so then you need to fire your teachers. Why? Well, because you just said I have straight A's, but you said this test is telling me that I'm not intelligent.
That's way to flip the script, yeah, right? So why would I have straight A's if the test is saying I'm an idiot, right? I mean, that's a way to flip the script right there. Yeah. That's pretty ingenious. At 8 years old, that's really ingenious.
Exactly. And so he looked at me and he said, okay, you can go back to class.
How did you find out you were autistic?
So it's kind of a funny story. So I struggled all through high school, junior high. I had really hard times with certain classes. And I actually thought I was stupid, and I believed the hype. But when I got to college, I was in the student union and saw this thing of a study that one of my psychology professors was doing around ADD. And I went in to apply. I'm thinking I'm going to be in the control group. I just thought I was stupid. And so he did a whole series of testing of everyone for this study. He was going to follow them all through 4 years of college. And he calls me into his office. He's my professor in this psychology 101 freshman year. Calls me into his office after class. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm thinking it's a paper or something like that. He's like, I got your results back. I was like, oh, okay. So when do I start? He's like, we got some work to do before you start.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I think you thought you might be in the control group. I'm like, yeah. Well, you're going to be my study group. And I'm like, because I'm thinking study group, so you're studying me? He's like, yeah. You have 3 things that are not usually common. You're dyslexic, you're ADD, and you're autistic. And how you are actually sitting here talking to me because of where you scored on the spectrum scale, it's usually people that are completely nonverbal, are completely they're not functioning in society.
So is that a scale?
Yes.
Is that scale like 1 to 10? Is that like, or do they do it like that? Is that
no? It's kind of like a bell curve.
Okay, like a non-verbal to verbal, and
Verbal.
each one of them is different.
Correct.
So do you gravitate towards one thing?
Yes.
With finance, apparently.
Really, it's economics and politics.
Really?
Yes.
So you want to get in a political conversation with me?
We can.
I'd love that. Probably not the viewers, but
you and I can do it privately. I'm more than happy to do that, or I can do it here too.
Yeah. So did you study a lot on the politics side?
Yes.
That's the 2 things, because I know everybody that's I've ever heard of gravitate towards something and then they just become ridiculous informed on it.
Yes.
They study everything they can about it.
Yes, I can tell you everything from in economics and politics. I can tell you all the minuscule stuff. My wife always has to remind me when I'll use a great example when the House Speaker this year was being elected.
That was just nuts.
That was nuts. But I'm like, why do they have to explain how this works? This is like 7th grade civics class. She's like, A, no one paid attention. 2, no one remembers it.
Yeah.
3, this isn't something people care about. And I'm going, why?
Yeah.
So I have to constantly remind myself that people don't understand what economics really is.
No.
And they don't understand politics.
I still don't think I understand politics, to be honest with you. I think it's just turned into, maybe it's always been this way, just the biggest popularity contest where it's irrelevant on somebody's credentials of being qualified to do the job.
I actually think it actually has evolved into that versus it being how it actually was. The problem is if you really look at, and this is just a quick history lesson, if you really look at our political system, you have to look at the UK because that's where our political system started from. So if you really look at it, our House of Representatives is their House of Commons.
Right.
Our Senate is the House of Lords. So if you think about what the House of Lords is, those are the rich, high estate, they're the owners. The House of Commons are supposed to represent the common people.
Which is the House of Representatives.
Which is the House of Representatives.
Yep.
The problem is now in order to run just a normal House race, and this has just blown up in the last 10 years, it's anywhere from $10 to $15 million just to run for a 2-year term. It's almost $30 million for a Senate race. So it's no longer really the Commons anymore. Now, the UK, they can still run a campaign because they have certain caps on what you can spend in spending.
That's where I was literally going to that. So from an economic standpoint and then also from a political standpoint, we have to get money out of politics.
Correct.
I don't care if you're liberal or Republican. I mean, if you run on that right there and you run on term limits, I think those are the only 2 things that are relevant. They're never going to pass it.
No.
I mean, I think Ted Cruz just tried to put something out there, and I think it's all pander. It's funny, the party that's never going to get the bill passed, puts the thing that always everybody wants because they know they're not going to pass it. Right. And they think, and maybe Americans are stupid enough to believe that, hey, I mean, he put the bill forward, but I mean, it's never going to get through the Senate because they're not the majority, and it's never going to get through the White House, right? Because that guy can't even speak a coherent sentence anymore. And
correct.
Right. So from an economic standpoint, we got to get the money out of it.
You've got to put a cap.
You got to put a cap on it.
You know, what that cap is, we can have a debate all day on that. But you got to put a cap on races.
Not only that, I look at it from how do you have media? I think everybody can agree to some level that there is media bias inside of politics today.
Yes, on both sides.
On both sides, right? But and if there's media bias, and that's obvious, right? And then you're giving money to that media organization from that party, you talk about a conflict of interest that we have in finance. There's so many conflicts of interest in the political spectrum. It's insane to me to even comprehend how all it is a money grab. Who's a popularity contest and how much stick your hand out and let's get paid.
And with media, it's actually a federal law violation for federal offices. If you actually look at the way the rules are, they just don't enforce it.
They don't enforce it.
But I actually like President Obama from an oratory perspective. I don't agree with his policies per se, but using him as an example, he was on Oprah 17 different times while he was running for president. The first time, his opponent was never ever on Oprah. That is a true FEC violation because if you put him on media, you have to give your opponent
the equal time.
Now, right. I'm using him as an example. A counter example would be Donald Trump in his first election in 2016. Honestly, I think this is why the media turned against him is because of the fact that they made him president. Because if you look at the early primary, he was doing horrible. But the Today Show, Good Morning America, all this mainstream television that we hear about kept putting him on almost every single morning to deal with something he said the night before. And then he was able to clarify his position. So he said a soundbite, knew they would take it wrong. To me, he's a master marketer.
He's a master. I don't think anybody could deny that.
No. And so he turned it into, all of a sudden, he's killing it in the primary, wins the primary. They continue it. And I think they finally realized how complicit they were. But it took them a very long time to do that. But at the same time, they were violating FEC law because they gave him a 30-minute time slot on almost every show to answer his questions or answer questions on statements he said. And they never went back to the other candidates. So that's the hard part. Because if you think back to the 1800s when you only had a paper, you didn't have radio, you didn't have TV, you definitely didn't have Twitter or Facebook or anything like that. So it was a lot easier to control it. And the messages that came out were a lot more controlled and I think a lot more unbiased. And so there's a lot that needs to be fixed to it, but you do have to have some caps. You do have to have some caps to media. I think social media is actually probably the most interesting thing because of the protections they get, yet they want to edit it.
Yeah, and in that Prop 31 or something like that, I can't remember what they did that, where they're not a media company or they're not a publication or whatever it is.
Section 130.
It's Section 130, that is something like that, right? And so my point, and there's so many podcasts, I don't want to get too deep in this. Right. My point to the political sphere when it comes to social media or any platform is, right, you can't say that you're transparent and that you're allowing everybody to speak, then turn around and deplatform everybody and then turn around and promote all this stuff. I mean, have you seen ChatGPT yet?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's going to be the next wave. I mean, we use it here just to brainstorm ideas internally to write something. I think Ryan probably uses it every day. We take, hey, here's 10 ideas about finance that we hadn't thought of today. You know what I'm saying? And it's just kind of that gap of where it can kind of get your creative juices running. I think that's it. But it's going to get better and better and better. And one of our initiatives is we're building our own financial software. Right. I mean, we're building a beast of a financial software is what I'm trying to build. And we already have allocated AI into it, machine learning AI into it, because I think it's here, right? I think Google just announced yesterday that they're coming out with their own version that they've been working with for a little bit already. So my point is go look at the bias inside of there. Go ask it about Donald Trump. Go ask it about Biden and see the reactions off of the platform. It's pretty shocking. I think they're already trying to create it or change it or make it more unbiased. But here's the point.
You're only as good as who builds it. So
I know, right? If they built it that way, that it's going to be crazy. But where do you think we're going right now? So, and I'll leave political out the windows. I got a theory, and I wanted to see what yours are before I threw mine out.
No, well, first of all,
I'm talking about the presidential race. That's
I know where you're going. But first of all, I just want to say how forward-thinking and amazing you are to me. I mean, we've known each other for a while, like you said, and the vision I've seen from your practice from 10 years ago today is just amazing, and how you keep, reinvigorating and reinventing. And a lot of people in our industry just don't do that. So
I appreciate that.
But
I always feel like I'm going slow as a turtle, right? Everybody around me is going, Brendan, you're nuts. Like, slow down. I'm going, I feel like I'm fixing
I feel the same way.
I feel like I'm fixing to be like blindsided where the whole thing's fixing to shift on me and I'm going to miss the boat. So, I think innovation for the weird people that we are have to be always innovating or we're dying.
See, and I always feel stupid and I always feel I'm slow. And, it's our own self-talk sometimes.
Yeah.
And, that's part of that adaptability. But as far as where we're going politically, real quick, I know who I would like to see go. But
I do too.
I think we're going to go, Trump-like. I think we'll, nominate DeSantis or someone like that. I'd rather see Nikki Haley make it out of the primary. I just don't think she will. But I also think that we're going to become even more divided. And, bring it back to financial for a second. I think we've got a huge fight with this with the debt limit. And, we've already maxed out our debt limit. We've moved money around to pay bills. But if we don't make certain changes, and I think that House election was actually very vital to our country's future. I just don't think that a lot of them are going to have the mettle to hold the line when we're about to default.
I want to touch on both those points, but I'm going to do them in order.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I Trump like DeSantis, I wouldn't mind. Nikki Haley, I wouldn't mind. The problem with all of this is if you look at it, and if it was Trump, because Trump's, he's in it, right? So if it's Trump and it's DeSantis, who you think wins that? I think it's going to be DeSantis every day, right? The problem is, and there's a lot of people talking about this, and it's really bugged me ever since I've heard it, is when you get Nikki Haley in there and you get, what is that?
Pence?
No, the Secretary of State, Pompeo. When you get Pompeo in there, he's just going to pull, both of them are going to pull enough off of DeSantis,
correct,
to get Trump nominated as the Republican, and then it's going to be just an all-out war.
Yes,
right, and that's my biggest fear. And I think both parties need to get away from the extremisms.
I agree.
Wherever you fall in that spectrum, I don't care, right? But we can't go back to Trump, and we can't live where we're at right now.
Correct.
And look who who the Democrats are putting up scares me to death. That dude is just literally it's Canada is all he is. He's just another version of Canada putting, I'm so bad with names.
Trudeau.
No, well, Trudeau, but the guy out of California. Newsom, thank you. So putting Newsom, this guy is the worst thing you could ever have in our country. he on so many different levels, and you can just pick a level. And that, I'm just saying, from my personal view, that's where I fall. I just think Nikki Haley to be fine. I'd be good. DeSantis would be fine. I'd be good with it. Pompeo, you know what I'm saying? But I don't think, here's another thing I think we need to do. If you're 65, you can't run.
Yes.
If you're 65, if you're a senior citizen and you're getting government benefits, right? Because we don't think you should work in our society anymore. So we're giving you the option to get out of working. You should not be holding that seat, right? And that's, get rid of term limits, right? I mean, add term limits.
Yes.
Excuse me.
I know what you meant.
And get out of money, right? And let's make sure we put a cap on you. You shouldn't be 80 years old running for president. And
Well, I mean, if you look at how our country was organized, now we did have, George Washington was in his late 60s, early 70s when he was president, but that's a whole different story. But they were all meant to be citizen legislatures.
right.
The president would stay there for 4 years, or at the time it was 2 years. It was a 2-year term. But the Senate, the House, all those people, they had real jobs.
Yeah, they had to go back to the real world. They could do
Right.
this for 4 to 6 years at max, or 2,
Right.
whatever.
So, but my biggest thing is let's cut their salaries. Let's cut their retirement plans. Let's cut their pension plans. Because what people don't know is a U.S. senator, one term, fills out 6 years. They are guaranteed a pension for life along with their spouse for $7,500
a month.
a month for life for serving 6 years.
So expand on that. Here's the thing I think that's even worse. I can't, are you registered? I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you buy stocks or anything without disclosing anything?
No.
I can't. I mean, I'm seeing and the fact that Twitter shut down the follow the Pelosi, feed that shows every single tweet that they did.
Yep.
I mean, she's the greatest investor, one of the greatest investors of all time. It's great. It's crazy. You should not, by any means necessary.
It's insider trading.
It's insider trading. Come on.
If you and I did that, we would be in jail.
It's nuts. This is absolutely insane that they're doing this. And they've done it for so long. And so, and on both sides, right?
Oh, yeah, both sides.
I mean, I think that report came out, and was it Dan, the Texas congressman? I like
Crenshaw, yeah.
Crenshaw. I like Crenshaw, right? In certain things, right? But I think he was number 3 on the most profitable trades, and I'm going from, you just shouldn't, right? I mean, I can't. I have to disclose everything, every entity I own, every asset I own.
Yes.
And they don't, and they have to do it like 20 days after they do it, and then that's kind of questionable if they do it then. And then you got so many black holes that they get to invest in, whether it's their own super PACs or.
I mean, a great example last year is the chip bill. So this was providing, I think, almost $300 billion, $400 billion, which is a drop in the bucket, but of U.S. investment money to build chip like Intel type chip manufacturers here in the U.S. and invest in those manufacturing firms to bring it out of Taiwan, to bring it out of other different things. Okay, they had been working on that thing for 3 years, and anyone that had worked on that bill all had money in all the 7 major companies that would have benefited from it. They all invested after they started working on that bill, and then they were so invested in getting that bill, but someone broke the news that Paul Pelosi just had option or exercised $5 million in options on that because the vote had just been scheduled. So he already knew that it was passing.
Right.
How that's not insider trading, I have no clue. But, some of them don't always necessarily benefit directly themselves, but it's, they do it all through corporations.
Their family, their second brothers, cousins, that comes back to them some way. I get it.
And they all do it, but it shouldn't be that way because, as you know, we have to disclose a lot. But even if you were like a CEO of a company or you were in the know in a certain company, certain things, they couldn't do the same thing. They would have to disclose it. They would have to, and they actually have to file a report. Yes, I'm selling X amount of shares. Here's why I'm selling them. So on and so forth.
And you got to give so many lead times. It's crazy. Yeah, and it should be that way, right?
Correct.
So and it's easy. And they're saying, well, why shouldn't we be able to invest in all this? And just make it where it's either in a blind trust or put it directly into, hey, you can only invest into mutual funds or ETFs, something that is broad sector. But even then, I don't like that because if you like the semiconductor deal, you could invest into the broad sector semiconductor ETF, and you'd be, probably just as good, probably not perfect, but that information's in the past, everything's, but options trading, derivatives trading, leverage trading, all of that stuff should be off the table.
The thing is, they already have that rule, but they have it for the executive branch. They have it for all the secretaries. the president, the vice president, they all have to divest themselves. Going back to Trump for a second, if you think about it, think about the whole big thing. He was the first ever business owner that became president. And for the most part, I mean, Jefferson and stuff had a business, if I counted, because he had Monticello and stuff like that. But true business owner where he had a corporation, he had to remove himself from the board. He had to remove himself from any decisions. His stock went into a blind trust. And now, yes, his sons became CEO and COO and stuff like that. And obviously they're talking, but,
right.
You know, he had to really clearly make a clear firewall. Governors in most states, Texas is, you know, same thing. They have to have a blind trust for any stocks, anything that are owned in Texas, companies that are in Texas or do business in Texas, so that they cannot affect that particular price because they don't know what's going on in there.
Sure.
So the fact that we already have that in place, but we don't have it in the people that are making the laws.
Right.
It's really, really funny. So they've passed the laws to require it for the people that sign the laws or enforce them, i.e. the executive branch. But the people that are actually passing it and negotiating, they don't want to have that because they're getting money under the table potentially. They're, you know, creating different legislation. And so bringing it back to farming for a second, that's one of the craziest things is I'm in DC probably 2 times a month, one time for the financial industry and one time for the farming industry, because you have your big farming companies, they spend $20-30 million a year in lobbying to make sure that bills get passed to help them.
Sure.
And I'm trying to make sure that, hey, you know, can we get a cap on fertilizer? Can we get a cap on certain things so that I can make food affordable for people? Because, I mean, really, vegetables, with as much of the inputs that go in, I'm not a big fan for subsidies. I'm not a big fan for price floors, but I am a big fan on price caps per se, because otherwise no one's going to buy my product and it's going to go to waste. And, you know, right now what people don't know is we have a 37% daily food waste in this country.
Where's that coming from, though? Is that coming from the restaurant industry? Because I always heard that's where it's really coming from. Or are you talking about, hey, this is something in a semi truck that we just don't have a buyer from it and it's just going to spoil?
It's not so much on the raw end or wholesale end. It's more about in the distribution warehouses because you can't get it out fast enough because some of it is perishable and, you know, health codes and health laws and things like that. But a lot of it's grocery stores and also and restaurants. But grocery stores more than restaurants, believe it or not. Grocery stores can keep the stuff on the shelf for about 2 to 3, 4 days, and then they toss it. And, you know, like here in Texas, you know, in February they have, every once in a while they have ice storms. Well, you know, the most recent ice storm in Texas, one of our most famous grocery stores, H-E-B, had to had to throw away, I should say.
Yeah, that was all over the news in Austin.
Yeah. Had to throw away over, I think it was 200 metric tons of food because it was spoiled, but it could still be cooked or different things like that. But based on health code laws, they couldn't sell it. And then, which I think was more telling, that I'm surprised that the media did not, and this goes to your point about the media and kind of telling their narratives, they were focused on the spoiled food and the fact that cops were arresting people for getting the food. Here's my take on it. People were going after dumpsters because they can't afford the food. And they saw dumpsters full of food and they were trying to feed their families. So that kind of tells you about the economy out there of where inflation is going and things like that.
That's fixed to say that's inflation right there. Yeah. I mean, that's, and we're seeing that, and nobody, and you know, I don't want to get into the political, economic space of that, but I don't think, and it's weird because I actually, you know, having a CFA and we have, you know, a PhD in economics, we have a chief economist that we consult with, and he's on our team, but we don't think this is over.
No.
Like, we actually see, you know, what we look at from a economic standpoint is like, this might be one of the first or the only times we see unemployment be sustained, and you don't see unemployment actually going down.
Correct.
Right? And this was a big, we have our investment committee meetings every Monday, and they're hours long, and they're deep dives into economics and where our holdings of our securities for our firm. And I'm concerned that, one is that I just don't understand the Fed. I don't think I'll ever understand the Fed, but the way that's structured, that's beyond, you know what I'm saying? You shouldn't give one guy or this team of guys that all worked for banks the ability to actually set policy like that. But I digress on there. But my point is if they're looking at a metric that says, hey, inflation's sustaining because unemployment's not going up, right? And so if that's the case and we keep employment the same, but yet, we could see this thing go into a deflationary environment, and we're starting to model that. True deflation. I haven't seen deflation
since the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of crazy. And then you got another, if you're an economist or if you're figured this one out, you're probably the smartest person on the planet. Now you got China locked up for 3 years. China's fixing to be, that's 17% of our global population is fixing to be able to buy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why, I look at this and I think that equities are actually going to be a good thing because they're going to actually keep going because guess what? You're fixing to get this inflow of deflationary environment, but yet stocks might actually go up.
Yes.
It's crazy. It is absolutely nuts on where we're at right now. And we looked back from 1977. We looked back to World War II. I mean, I can't see any place where this has repeated itself. I mean, we're on really a new...
Exactly, which is why, I mean, if you look at, as of February 2023, if you look at true economic definition, we are in a recession.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, there's no question
about it. There's no question about it. However, politicians, other economists are trying to reframe it because usually in a recession, you have massive layoffs. Now, we are seeing some companies, but I don't think they're laying off per se because of the market. I think they're laying off because they overreacted to a market.
Well, they overhired when it was COVID, right?
But that's what I mean. They overreacted to a market.
Yeah.
And so they overhired, and
they're just dialing that back down.
Correct.
Like everybody's blowing up Amazon for $77,000. They hired and they just laid off 18,000.
Correct.
Right? They're still plus 50 some odd thousand over a 2-year period.
Exactly. So I think they're just trying to pull it back a little bit, but they're not necessarily trying to contract. And so in a normal recession, you would start to see companies like Amazon, Google, IBM, or whatever, contracting below what their normal, but they're still above where they were even 5 years ago.
Right.
As far as
or even 2 years ago.
Even 2 years ago. So they're just trying to consolidate certain things. Twitter I think is an interesting case where they actually went below what they normally would carry, but I think that was because of
ownership change,
leverage buyout, all that stuff.
Yeah, so he's trying to get costs way down because he overpaid for a company.
Exactly. So I think that is a whole different, people are saying that was the lead of it. I think that's an exception compared to the rule. Now, what's interesting is Hasbro and Mattel, who have announced layoffs, and toys are usually a pretty
good leading indicator.
Pretty good leading indicator. But if you look at their overall employee levels, I think they just, again, my personal opinion, I still think that it's an overhire for them, and they were just bringing back to normal levels because they're at the same level as they were now 5 years ago. And I think they just overhired to deal with certain demand with online and all those different things. So what's telling is usually when you have a recession, you have massive layoffs, and then you start to have slow rehires, but we're not seeing that as much right now. What we are seeing, though, is the number of small business starts are up almost 1,800% from 3 years ago. And so I think
I didn't know that.
So I think what people are doing is they're either opening up consulting or they're opening up small manufacturing, small different things because they came from a corporate environment, realize, and that's honestly how I'm in the role I'm in now. I was in a corporate environment. I started to get downsized, and I realized looking at my industry, it's going to continue to happen no matter where I go, unless I'm a top performer. So why be a top performer for that company versus be a top performer for my company? So that's what I did. And I think a lot of people, because when you look at the average age of starts, it's two very, very, according to the SBA, it's two very, very interesting demographics. The first one makes a lot of sense. it's people 55 and older. And if you think about, and I'm giving you a leading question because I've already given you the answer, but what is the number one discrimination right now in the marketplace?
It's ages.
It's age.
Yep.
Okay. So they're out there opening their own businesses. They also have the resources to do so. Okay. But the other demographic that I thought was really interesting was 22 to 25-year-olds. And why is that?
Come out of college, they don't want to
Come
go
out of college,
corporate America, and they're ready. They're just going to do it on their own.
Well, there was a study by the Federal Reserve. I mentioned the Federal Reserve, but there was a study by the Federal Reserve that actually asked college students, what do you need in salary? What do you expect in salary to do an entry level job? You know what the average response was?
I bet it's like 60 grand.
Close, 78.5.
Yeah, and even hiring my team is, I got to tell you, my team is I've done this for 12 years now, and the team I have today is the best I've had inside of. They're not to say the team I had before was any worse. It just that we're clicking, right?
Correct.
Everybody's in the one vision. Everybody sees what we're trying to do. And in past cases, it was fragmented. I had another partner and great guy. I love him to death. Yep. And he had a different vision than I did. So it was always these two different
competing forces.
Yeah, competing forces inside of there. So now everybody's going, hey, this is the direction I want to go, right? Get on board and let's go. And so I just got a really good team around me. But that is, I will tell you, this is the year I struggled most with hiring people.
Correct.
And this last year, I got the cream of the crop. I got great guys. I really got what I wanted. But it was always the hardest part is like I'm always stretching the firm's budget as far as employee costs just to get the guy I want. And it's paid out. I mean, we just hired Gustavo in January, right? That dude's a diamond in the rough.
Yes.
I mean, that guy is just phenomenal. And so him just being in my meetings with me and doing all the detail work behind the scenes freed me up just to be able to do this podcast.
Correct.
And it just, it's buying back so much time there. And so we're in that space, but I will tell you that youth today, and I don't blame them. Here's the thing is you can go online right now and there's 1,000 podcasts on this.
Correct.
That literally says, go make money online and do these 12 things. And you can make, $30, $40, $50,000.
Correct.
Right. So it's now you still
look at the YouTube guy that got in trouble for saying young people are lazy. If you really wanted to own a Lamborghini, if you're a 22-year-old male, you should own a Lamborghini. You need to go work at it. The problem is they missed the 45 minutes prior to that statement of where he talked about how he started 18 different businesses, failed at 16, had to work his butt to get there.
Yeah.
They just see that he was on YouTube, was successful. They don't understand all that stuff in there. But yeah, I agree.
The other side of that too is, and I look back at this too, because I always analyze when I'm talking to my staff or I'm having things is like, I mean, I have some guys that are way smarter than me on my team. And so I'm going, why are you not, on your own, right? And then I look back in certain conversations or meetings or events or things, and I'm like, that wisdom and experience of failing 16 times is the point to it. And I would tell you, like, if I had to start it all over again, I probably wouldn't end up in the same space. Right. It's a lot harder today to start and run a business. And it goes to the second data set that's actually starting businesses, 55-year-olds that's been in corporate America. They know what the standard is. They know how they can fix a niche, be extremely successful at it, and very rich doing it.
And they have the relationships.
And they have a little bit of capital set to the side to weather that first couple of years. And so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting.
But I want to call you on one thing you just said that, hey, you're really, really smart, but why aren't you doing it on your own? And one of the things that
risk.
Yeah, it's risk, but it's also...
A lot of guys don't like that risk.
They don't like the risk, but also I think our definition of smart needs to change. And what I mean by that is... and I've got a unique perspective because I am autistic, and I have been told many times in my life that I'm stupid because of how I present ideas or how I presented myself. I think there are, we all heard book smart, street smart, but I also think that there is people that you can memorize certain things and you can really understand a certain area, but if you can't interpret, if you can't infer it, if you can't also communicate it, I think that also makes you more susceptible to being more, I don't want to say a follower, but more in a structured environment. You and I, we're smart, but I think I like to say we're more intelligent because we might have to work at it different ways, but we can take, like I heard some of your conversations today. You and I can take what we're listening to and we can infer quickly and put it in there. We don't have to do all the research for it because we've already done the research. And I think, like you said, we have the experience, we have in that, but you're having farming conversations. I'm going through them. Okay, I would have asked this question, and you were asking all the same questions I would ask. And it's just because of the experience. Like you said, you're in West Texas. You know what's going on and where the market's at, things like that. So I think those are the different things that set people apart. Is part of it is our education system, where we don't train them to think. We train them to memorize, or we train them to actually just know something and become smart, but not necessarily intelligent.
But another reason that you're here too, so you were you were a college basketball player.
I was.
We're both sitting down here and we're kind of looking at each other in eye to eye, right? But that is a very, I'm setting up a little bit when I'm saying you're 7'2".
Yes.
I'm 5'9" on a good day, right? That's right. So Jen laughs at me on there, but you're 7'2". So you played where?
I played at a school called McAllister College. It's in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
And I played water polo and basketball there. And then I was also...
I guess you weren't a point guard. You're probably a center.
I was more of a center. I was a 4 or 5. But there were times where I had to bring the ball up the court at different times just because our point guard was only 5'9". EB, I apologize if you hear that. But there were a couple schools where their point guards were 6'3", 6'4".
Right.
And so...
Had a little arm length on them.
Yeah, so we had to adjust, but again, that's adaptability. That's adjusting. So
my point to saying that, so you're tall, right? But you've also been plagued with a couple of broken bones here. You're on crutches today, still recovering from a foot or ankle surgery. I forgot what. Both, right? And so disability is one of the things that you kind of become a pretty big specialist into.
Yes.
And so talk about that for a second, because that's, I would say, out of all the things I do in my practice, that's probably one or two of the weakest things that I'm not as educated in.
Yeah.
And I think the partnership with us has been great, because any good planner will say will lie to you if he says he knows everything, right?
Correct.
And so you just got to figure out everything that you can, put it in there, and then relearn. I learned this from a set of doctors that were clients. I always said, Brandon, physicians are not, they don't know everything. They know how to research. Right. So they look at a case and they know how to go back and they research and they look it up. And I was like, wow, that's literally what we do. Like, I literally get out of a client meeting, take my notes down, and I go research it. So disability is one of those things that we've had, 2 or 3 conversations over the last couple, and a pretty deep one today in our private meeting. But explain how disability affects everybody, especially business owners, because I think that's really where.
So you asked 2 questions. So let me answer the first one. Why did I become a DI expert? And I became a DI expert because I was going to go play professional basketball in Europe. I had a pretty bad injury in college, and that completely changed my career trajectory. I'm happy where I'm at, don't get me wrong, but I lost out on a good amount of money, and I started actually using that as a story and talking to my clients about it, about how, what if something were to change your career trajectory, your business trajectory, where, when everyone thinks of a disability, I'll say it now, it's not something I share a lot, but because of my leg injuries, I'm going to have to start using a wheelchair almost full time. And so it has a whole lot of different connotations to it. I'm no longer going to be the tallest person in the room, at least not standing. Those different things. But when people think of disability, that's exactly what they think of. They think of someone in a wheelchair. And unfortunately, in our society, when you have someone in a wheelchair, What do most people think? Oh, they're not as adaptive. You can't do anything, things like that. Now, you and I both know in our industry,
It's all above your shoulders.
all I need is a phone, a computer, whatever, no big deal. Right. And a lot of industries are that way these days. However, think about it this way. You and I were talking in our private meeting with one of your partners, and he's had the flu for last week and a half. Have you ever had a flu that bad where you just can't work, you can't talk, you can't think, you can't do those different things? We all have, right?
Sure.
Okay. Think of if you're the business owner and you're not able to go into work every day and you're not able to drive the business. Now, hopefully you have a good team around you, but over time, we've all heard the saying, if the cat's away, the mice will play.
Sure.
They don't have the same passion about your business you do. And from a business perspective, I think this is probably the most underinsured, underprotected, underdiscussed is probably the most important part with any business owner. We talk about wealth preservation. We talk about risk protection. We talk about all these other different things with business owners, but we never talk about their income protection. And that's what I don't use the word disability a lot. I actually use the phrase income protection, because what I want to make sure is that everything they work so hard to build up stays that way. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, both providing income for you, but also covering your overhead if you're not able to keep the business going, which keeps your employees in place, all those different things. So those are all different things I like to take a look at. But
I think you brought a point that I was like, wow, because I like the law. I tell a couple friends of mine that if I did it over again, I should have been a lawyer. And my dyslexia always hurt me on that, reading and all that, and internalizing it from that standpoint. I got to do it right to be able to get it. But my point is you said there's some pretty prominent, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but court cases that are going through right now on disability because of buy-sell agreements and the way that they're structured. And I thought that was really interesting because touched on that for a point. And I said, we write what we call a modern buy-sell now. Right. It used to be a cross-purchase was the old way, but it's gravitating more and more like a modern. And then there's two problems with the modern here. Because now you're saying the insurance companies are thinking they're captive insurance companies.
Potentially.
Right? Yep. Potentially, there's that. But then you're saying with the modern buy-sells, too, that these buy-sell agreements aren't written with attorneys the most optimized. It's very, very finite in their language.
Correct.
Which is creating
it's written by attorneys, so it's going to be very finite.
Yeah, right.
And they're not writing it from a legal point of view, but they're not writing it from an established case point or case law point of view. And what I mean by that is if you pull up your buy-sell contract, and I mean the ones that actually are you either pull off of Rocket Lawyer or you actually go to an attorney for things like that. Not the ones you just draw up on a napkin, which I've seen those too.
Yeah, I've seen many of those.
But what's in there is there's standard clauses when it actually talks about death, disability, retirement. And if you really read those clauses, and any lawyer is going to tell you when they're prosecuting it, or they're the plaintiff, or a judge is going to read it, they're going to read it exactly how it's written. And a lot of how it's written, especially on the disability side, is an immediate buyout of the partner.
If you're disabled.
The problem with that is most disabilities have a lifespan of about 12 to 14 months. Some of them are permanent. Some of them, are a lot shorter. Average time is about 12 to 14 months. If you're a business partner and you have that immediate buyout, you have to put yourself in the shoes of your business partner's spouse. Okay, so that business. So let's just say you and I are business partners. Since I'm disabled, I'll make myself the one disabled. I get disabled. I'm no longer in the business right now, right? I'm not working.
You're an expense.
I'm an expense to you.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to get me out as soon as possible. But at the same time, you're going to want to do it at the most advantageous price that you possibly can. My wife, though, is going to want to get as much money out of you as possible because I'm not in the business, and that's what's been creating our income. So my wife's going to take a look at that contract. She's going to bring it to a lawyer, and it says immediate buyout at 50% or whatever the percentage is, da-da-da-da. She's going to present that to you and say, I want a check for X.
Right.
Immediately. You're going to go, I can't do that.
not only is I lost my partner that was generating the revenue,
Right.
but now on top of that, I don't have the revenue to actually pay you full market value of whatever the multiple that you or formula you created inside the buyout.
Correct. And then how do you determine what the market value is? Is it market value before I was disabled? Is it the market value now because I was providing X amount of revenue? All that kind of stuff. So that's where that clause needs to actually have less specificity and a little bit more vagueness into it of saying that after a year of disability or after X amount of time, this will come out over a 5-year period of time in cash flow. But meantime, it's for the next 12, it will be an equal share. You have to really have that conversation. And I love lawyers, but a lot of lawyers just do not know how to have that conversation. And that's where you and I come in.
Well, and I think I don't want to paint lawyers in the bad deals because
that's why I said I love lawyers.
Yeah, I love them. Yeah, I don't want to paint them. But there's different types of lawyers.
Correct.
And a lot of business owners don't understand that, you look at a lawyer, I got a lawyer, right? But that lawyer is just like, hey, when's the last time you went and, had your brain surgery done by your foot doctor? Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's two different things in there. And so being in this career for as long as I have there is a ton of specialists inside of there. And so making sure you get to the right business attorney to make sure they know what they're talking about and they have those partners like you or us inside of there is really, really important because they'll catch things like that or they have a higher probability of catching it.
And sometimes you want industry specific. So
I would say that too. Yep.
I live in Austin. So Austin is the new tech hub. Mm-hmm. If you have there's a lot of business lawyers there, but a lot of those business lawyers don't understand the tech world. And they put in an evaluation based on, the last formal evaluation. Well, in the tech world, that could have been 7 years ago.
Sure.
Or
what could have been 6 months ago and the multiple is completely different.
Correct. But what I'm saying is when they say formal evaluation, how are you defining that? Because in the tech world, a venture capitalist can come in and really create a different evaluation that is not really truly from a business evaluation standpoint.
It's from a multiple or hypothetical.
It's from a multiple or hypothetical, and then also now that's
gold. That's it. That's in the contract. You're paying me 50 times multiple.
Correct. And so when you just say formal evaluation, that's a formal evaluation. That's a venture capitalist has come in and looked at the books and said, okay, I'm going to do this. So he's evaluated the business at X. But the IRS or, a business auditor might only evaluate it at
Y. Yeah.
So.
And I'm fortunate. And, all this stuff happens for a reason, I think. And one of the ones that I got partnered up early on in my career with a really good attorney.
Yes.
And in our space and he taught me so much. And we worked so many cases together. I mean, we're in the probably hundreds or thousands over the last 10 years. And some of the ones that I've seen on these is valuations matter, but they matter less than I hate valuations either. And I hate figures. Put a formula in there.
Correct.
Put a formula in there in your buy sell. X times X times X.
And that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and put that in there. And if you don't agree upon that, then step 2 is you get evaluation, I get evaluation, and then we get a third-party evaluation, and that's where we go.
But see, that's what I'm saying is it needs to be very specific that way.
Yeah, but there's always, I like it where there's a backup. Right. If because you don't know 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, that formula could not even be relevant anymore. Because the company's morphed and it's changed, right? And I will tell you, there's no time I've ever sat down with the business owner and says, hey, it's 3 years. You ready to review that buy-sell agreement? It's like, oh, geez, put a bullet in my head, right? It's like nobody wants to do that. And so we had one in Midland that was probably the most prominent case I've ever worked. And one of the business partners was shot and killed. And I was in that meeting. And they were brothers, and the two business partners that were brothers said, we will absolutely document and do these valuations and put it in the minutes and do all these things and put it in our buy-sell and keep a copy with it. And I looked up and I was like, you might do it once. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even do it once before the other one was, passed. And so it's really, really hard when you make it harder on yourself when you just make it simple. Put a formula in there. If the formula is no longer relevant, then you can contest it, come into, I'll get evaluation, you get evaluation, let's get a third-party evaluation. And I think everybody's covered. But going back to the disability, how is that on a disability side? This is my question, genuine question here. So let's say you have a 12-month clause in your buy-sell. Okay, how do you gap that? Because I will tell you, I've never in my 12-year career ever seen a funded buy-sell.
Correct.
Right? I've seen a funded buy-sell for death. I mean, we do those all the time, right? But I've never seen a funded buy-sell for disability in a buy-sell.
Correct. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and until I really started talking about it, I had never seen one. Now I've seen 250, and that's only because I've actually gotten them funded. But how you gap it is, and again, this goes back to that clause, is you have to actually put in there for the first 12 months, we will, you have to figure it out. And you have to sometimes put language in there of, we will continue to share profits at
XYZ for 6 months.
For 6 months or 12 months. Because now with disability, you can actually do a disability by sell. And with that disability by sell, usually the waiting period's a year or 2 years. So what you may do is you may have a sliding scale. You might start at, for 6 months, 100% equal 50-50 share. Then it's a 60-40 and so on and so forth. And then we start buying out the business utilizing the policy. And you actually put that in the clause. But that's where what's really funny is when people bring that to me and say, okay, well, yeah, it's a 50-50 partnership and it's worth $2 million each, da-da-da-da. I'm like, okay, great. Can I see the buy-sell? Well, they don't really have a buy-sell. Okay, I can't move forward. I can't protect that. I can't help fund that because the insurance company is going to want to see that document because the way you structure it is going to be based on that document. So that's when you have to get the lawyer involved. And that's where a lot of times we've had problems is the lawyer just wants to make it very general. And we need to make it very specific so that it's really out there so that people really truly understand what's going to happen. Because you and I'm going back to our example, you and I as business owners, you and I aren't going to have the problem.
It's always the spouse.
It's going to be our spouse or
right.
My daughter or whatever,
right.
They're going to be the one that's going to come in there and not have the same emotional connection to it. So, you talked about the two brothers. That adds a whole different complexity because they're going to want to take care of their brother's family, but at the same time, they got to take care of their business first. And so those are all the different things that you got to kind of take a look at. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. There is a way. So are you funding these buy sells where they kick in like 90 days? And so there is that gap inside of there, or are you doing overhead? Are you doing
gap? So you basically use overhead. You use individual DI to cover the income off of it.
Okay.
And then the buyout actually occurs generally in month 12 or month 18.
And then on top of that, you're turning around and they're in life policies. There's accelerated death benefits.
Correct.
That you can actually use as a portion of the buyout as well, even though they didn't pass. So, but you have to there's riders and there's things that
there's riders, but that should be covered in a buy-sell agreement potentially.
That they need to be funded with both sides. Because I think a perfect plan would be like short-term disability, long-term disability, life insurance with an accelerated death benefit rider.
Correct.
And then you're covered no matter which way you go. It's
100%. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And it should all be kind of covered in there so that, and then, really, I'll take it a step further, is you should have something called a QSPP, Qualified Sick Payment Plan. It's usually a page or 2-page document. And where I've seen, and I didn't bring this up in our meeting, but I'll bring it up here. I actually testified in a case in November on this. And basically what happened was business owner, one of his favorite employees got pregnant. Okay. We all want to think of our employees as family.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest things.
Right. And that's why I'm bringing it up for you. So he paid her 100% salary. He didn't reduce her, even though she was out on maternity leave for 7 months. He paid her 100% salary. Another employee got pregnant, was not the most stellar employee. He didn't really like her. He fired her. Well,
you're screwed on that one.
you know, he's screwed on that. But if you actually had a QSPP, which actually says, here's how I'm going to do it. And especially if you're dealing with a DI buy sell or some type of buy sell, an employee is still going to win if they see that the owner got still their share, still got their income, even though they're an owner. And
Right.
I know there's difference, but employees aren't going to see that. But if they see that this person is being taken care of and they're not being taken care of, they're going to sue. That QSPP will actually specify how you would cover that. And it can carve out owners are different. It can carve out executives
Employees.
are different, employees, all those different things. And I think that's a lot of things that business owners miss. And believe it or not, a lot of lawyers miss it too.
Is that so? What type of lawyer really specializes? Because the main ones,
a business lawyer.
Is it a business lawyer? Because we use a business lawyer, but it specializes in probate and estates and business structuring.
Yeah, you actually
Is
really,
it an HR kind of an attorney that you're looking at? Is
you
when you're
want a business contracts lawyer.
yeah.
So
Okay.
one that's going to work in doing with contracts, probably they do a lot of M&A work. They probably do a lot of stock work, things like that. But also HR as well. You know, they're looking at that whole
I could
piece.
see the HR one paying into that scenario where if you're doing that kind of document that really lines out the employees, executives, and ownership of how they're going to be taken care of. And I think I haven't even considered that. I mean, not very many companies do, I would think.
No one does, and that's why I'm bringing it up on this podcast. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, man, it's I can't believe we covered as much as we did today. It was completely way worth the wait, and I'm glad you actually came up here in person, man. To say that you're an interesting guy is probably the most underestimated statement that's out there. I did not know all the stuff that's going, but it's our first podcast.
Yeah.
And man, I love that you were on here, and thanks for being on Pursuing Alpha for the first time. And
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it.
We'll see you and hopefully come back. Yeah, I'm sure
will.
there's a lot of conversations we can have on there.
Perfect. Thanks
See
so
you, man.
much.
Talk to you soon.